Well, the baby killer is predicted to be handed a full life term and could be compelled to attend the sentencing if she continues to refuse.
The police fear she may have attacked as many as 30 more babies after detectives identified suspicious incidents from her time at the hospital.
So let's speak to Richard Scorer now, who's the head of Abuse, Law and Public Inquiries at Slater and Gordon law firm, who represented two of the victims' family. And you're advising, I believe, on some aspects of the public inquiry, Richard. What should that public inquiry look like? Because at the moment it isn't going to be judge-led, which means that nobody can be compelled to give evidence. But why would anybody working for the NHS not cooperate with such an inquiry?
Well, that's the nub of the issue. Why would anybody not cooperate? But we know we're dealing here with a set of hospital managers who were not keen, to put it mildly, to have the truth of this come out. That seems to be clear already. So it would be naive to think that you're going to get proper cooperation in the context of an inquiry. And so in order to have an effective inquiry, we need an inquiry with proper powers, the power to compel witnesses to attend and answer questions, but also the power to compel production of documents. That's really important as well, because there will be lots of documents that are going to be very relevant to this, and the inquiry needs to see all of them and be able to make a proper judgment about what's happened. And it can only do that if it has the proper powers.
Richard, you're representing two families. God only knows what they've been going through. How distressing was it for your clients to learn that one of the issues about not calling in the police earlier was the idea to do so would potentially damage the reputation of the hospital?
I think it's horrific and appalling, and unfortunately it's something we've seen in all too many cases, whether it's to do with awful situations like this or child abuse or so on, or institutions and organisations placing reputational protection ahead of patient safety and public safety. So it's something we've seen far too often. And in the health service, I think we have a particular problem in that with clinicians, there's a process of accountability for them, but with hospital managers, there doesn't seem to be a proper process of accountability, and you get this situation where hospital managers can fail and then fail upwards and get promoted into other roles where they fail, and then retire on gold-plated pensions and all of those things, and that is something that cuts across the whole of the health service, not just this case, and it's something that the inquiry needs to look at.
This woman, this killer, had line managers. And it didn't take the police so long when they came in to work out the recurring theme that when staff went off shift, the collapse of the baby was when she was there, often alone. We need to hear from these line managers, don't we, in this public inquiry or in this inquiry, and possibly, do they not potentially face criminal proceedings themselves?
Well, I'm not going to jump the gun on that. We have to see exactly what happened, and that's why we need an effective inquiry to bring that out. We need to get to the truth. That's really important. And I think then more broadly than that, we have to look at the accountability of the individuals here, and then how we can ensure that there is proper accountability, management accountability across the health service as well.
Richard, in those instances, as Andrew just said, where it was quite obvious that the shifts in which Lucy Letby was on, these babies were falling into distress, and obviously some of them lost their lives, 7 babies at her hands. Was there ever a sense within the department that she just wasn't doing a good job, that she was mismeasuring the milk that she gave these babies? Because when we say she murdered these children, very subtle, very clever, very... you'd have to have a knowledge of the science and the doctors, and you'd have to have a knowledge of the medicine that you were distributing to end these lives in this way. Was there ever a sense that she was looked into it just being not very good at her job?
Well, I mean, that is one of the issues that needs to be unpicked here. But I think what a fundamental point in all of this is when you have failings in the health service, who is looking at those? Who is making the judgment about what's gone wrong? Because obviously you had scientifically trained clinicians expressing concern and identifying that there was a problem, and then you have managers deciding how to deal with that when they're not actually scientifically trained. I mean, you can get into health service management with a degree in politics or history of art. So don't necessarily have that scientific training. And I think more generally across the health service, where you have evidence that something has gone wrong, we need to look at, who is then making the judgment about what then needs to be done about it. Is that judgment being made independently, or is it being made by managers who may not be trained to make that assessment and may have a stake in reputational protection, which means that they don't address the issue properly.
Isn't that the point, Richard, that potentially then these are managers who made these decisions, who overruled the medical people, were thinking about the reputational damage of the hospital and perhaps themselves?
Yeah, that's an absolutely key issue. I mean, it's very clear that reputational protection was a feature here, and it actually, I mean, it's stated in terms in one of the management communications. So we know that was an issue. We obviously need to unpick the detail behind that and then see what we need to do to ensure that that doesn't happen across the rest of the health service. Because, I mean, these kinds of things have happened before, and they'll happen again unless we get a grip on it.
Richard, are these families liable to receive compensation for their loss? We know that obviously litigation within the NHS is a huge area which costs billions every year when medical malpractice is found to have happened. What's the situation for the families now?
Well, that'll be something that will have to be addressed down the line, and that's not the primary focus of the families at the moment. The focus of the families is making sure that we get a proper inquiry and that proper lessons are learned. Because, I know this is a cliche, but they do not want other people to have to go through what they've been through, and that's why it's so important to learn the lessons here.
Yeah.
Just briefly, Richard, you are representing two families. There's a great debate and hoo-ha about whether Letby will be in the witness box to hear the sentencing, to hear the witness statements. The families you represent, would they prefer it that she was?
Absolutely. And, I've represented victims of crime for the best part of 25 years, victims of serious crime, and having the defendant in the witness box to hear the sentence and listen to victim impact statements is a really important part of justice and accountability. We've got to change the law on this. There are things that we can do. I mean, they've been talked about this morning, and it's something that definitely needs to happen.
Would you like to see people dragged in against their will on handcuffs or in any way?
I don't want a situation where a defendant is making a spectacle of the trial process. We've got to avoid that. But I do think it's important that the court has the power, if necessary, to do that, to ensure that the prisoner is produced. I mean, I think that's something that's got to be addressed. There are legal complexities around that, but it has got to be addressed and it's got to be done.
What sort of penalties could be added on for a defendant in order to make them go into court?
Well, again, that's something that a new law would need to address. Obviously, the approach would be that it would become an aggravating factor in sentencing. But of course, in the Letby case, that may not be relevant. If she gets a whole life term, that's not going to change because of her non-appearance.
Well, they could say solitary confinement and no visits.
Well, look, I share the sentiment that you're expressing, and I think that this is something that needs to be looked at properly. We need to get a change in the law so that prisoners can't behave in this way. It's an important part of justice and accountability that they attend sentencing. We need to ensure that happens.
Thank you.
All right,
Richard Scorer there from Slater and Gordon.